The media plays its game. The powerful control the narrative. But you have the power to question it all. What's your take? Did we just witness a moment of truth or another masterful distraction? Let me know in the comments. And if you're tired of being spoon-fed the same old stories, smash that like button and subscribe, because real conversations start right here. Elon Musk receives an invitation to appear on Bryant Palmer's popular talk show, a decision that would set the stage for one of the most memorable interviews in recent television history. The email arrives like any other, with a simple subject line, "Invitation to the Bryant Palmer Show." At first, Musk barely glances at it. He receives countless requests from talk shows, news programs, and tech panels, most of which he declines. But Bryant Palmer is different. Palmer's show is one of the biggest on television, known for its blend of humor, controversy, and sharp interviews. It has a massive following, with viewers tuning in not just for the guest but for Palmer himself. His ability to push boundaries, challenge ideas, and sometimes outright humiliate his interviewees. Musk hesitates. His PR team has already vetted the request. "It's a good opportunity," his assistant had said. "Palmer reaches millions." Musk isn't worried about exposure. He's one of the most recognizable figures in the world, but he's curious. He knows Palmer's reputation, how the host can turn an interview into a spectacle, how he thrives on making his guests uncomfortable. But Musk has never been one to back down from a challenge. After a moment of consideration, he decides, set it up. The day of the interview arrives and Musk finds himself in a sleek, glass-walled studio in Los Angeles. The green room is quiet, filled with the low hum of distant conversations. A production assistant hands him a bottled water and disappears. Musk checks his watch. The interview is set to begin in 10 minutes. Across the room, a large screen plays highlights from Palmer's past interviews. Musk watches as clips of political leaders, Hollywood actors, and CEOs flash across the screen. Some laugh nervously, some argue, and others sit stone-faced as Palmer toys with them like a cat with a mouse. Musk smiles slightly. He knows what's coming. He's been through enough interviews to recognize the pattern: bait, provoke, wait for a reaction. The real question is, how far will Palmer push? A stagehand appears at the door. 5 minutes, Mr. Musk." Musk stands, adjusting the sleeves of his black jacket. With the ease of a man who has faced rockets exploding midair, factories failing, and financial meltdowns, he walks toward the stage. The studio is packed, with hundreds of people filling the seats. Some are die-hard fans, others skeptics, and a few have probably just come for the drama. The set is modern, a circular stage surrounded by bright LED panels. A large desk sits at the center, with 2 chairs, one for Palmer, one for Musk. The host himself is already there, flipping through a stack of cue cards. Bryant Palmer looks up as Musk approaches, his grin wide and practiced. "Elon," he says, standing up to shake Musk's hand. "Glad you could make it." Musk shakes his hand firmly. "Likewise." They take their seats as the audience hushes. The show's theme music plays and the cameras roll. The stage lights dim, leaving only the 2 men in sharp focus. Palmer turns toward the camera, flashing his signature smirk. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a very special guest tonight, the man behind Tesla, SpaceX, Neuralink, and a dozen other companies I probably can't pronounce. The one, the only, Elon Musk." The audience claps, some cheering, others murmuring. Palmer leans forward, elbows on the desk. "So, Elon," he begins, his voice smooth, "let's get right into it. People call you a genius, a visionary. Some say you're changing the world. Others think you're a complete lunatic." He chuckles, waiting for a reaction. Musk smiles faintly. "I think history will decide." Palmer tilts his head. "Fair enough. But let's talk about something a little more interesting than just history, shall we?" There's something in his tone, playful but sharp. The audience senses it. This isn't going to be a friendly chat, but Musk had expected that. He's ready. Elon Musk arrived at the studio with the quiet confidence of a man who had faced far greater challenges than a television interview. The glass-walled building gleamed under the Los Angeles sun, its modern architecture a fitting prelude to the sleek, high-tech set inside. As Musk stepped in, A production assistant greeted him with a polite nod, handing him a bottled water before disappearing down the hall. The green room was quiet, save for the low hum of distant voices and the occasional shuffle of crew members making last-minute preparations. Across the room, a large screen played highlights from Bryant Palmer's past interviews. Musk's gaze settled on the screen, watching as clip after clip reinforced what he already knew. Palmer was a master at his craft. There was a method to the host's madness. In one clip, a Hollywood actor sat rigid, fumbling over words as Palmer cornered him with a well-placed question about a past scandal. In another, a tech CEO chuckled nervously, dodging Palmer's relentless probing. Politicians squirmed, business moguls snapped back, and occasionally someone would crack entirely, reduced to a defensive, stumbling mess under Palmer's sharp, calculated pressure. Musk watched, his expression unreadable. He had seen these tactics before. Bait, provoke, wait for the reaction. Palmer thrived on creating discomfort, on making his guests the spectacle rather than the substance. It was entertainment disguised as journalism, and tonight Musk was the main event. A production assistant peeked in. 5 minutes, Mr. Musk. He nodded, adjusting the sleeves of his black jacket. The weight of expectation in the room was almost tangible now. He wasn't just here as the CEO of Tesla, SpaceX, or Neuralink. He was here as a figurehead of controversy, someone people either admired or despised. He took a slow breath. He had faced rockets exploding midair, factories on the brink of collapse, and financial crises that could have destroyed him. A televised sparring match with Palmer? That was just another challenge. As he made his way to the stage, the energy shifted. The audience buzzed with anticipation, hundreds of eyes waiting for the moment he would take his seat across from Palmer. The studio lights glowed, the cameras stood ready, and at the center of it all sat the man himself, Bryant Palmer, flipping through a stack of cue cards, his signature smirk already in place. Palmer looked up as Musk approached, extending a hand. "Elon," he said smoothly, his grin practiced and knowing. "Glad you could make it." Musk shook his hand firmly. "Likewise." They took their seats, the audience hushed, and the show's theme music rolled in. The tension had fully settled now, thick in the air like an electric charge before a storm. Palmer turned toward the camera, the smirk never leaving his face. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we have a very special guest." The game had begun. His stage was set, the lights burned bright, and the cameras zoomed in as Bryant Palmer flashed his signature smirk. He turned to the audience, setting the tone with effortless charm. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a very special guest tonight. The man behind Tesla, SpaceX, Neuralink, and a dozen other companies I probably can't pronounce. The one, the only, Elon Musk." The audience responded with a mix of cheers, murmurs, and scattered applause. Musk sat comfortably in his chair, his expression neutral but attentive. He had seen this play before, knew exactly how it worked. Palmer leaned forward, elbows on the desk. "So, Elon," he began, his voice smooth, casual. "People call you a genius, a visionary. Some say you're changing the world. Others think you're a complete lunatic." He chuckled, waiting for a reaction. Musk barely blinked. "I think history will decide." Palmer tilted his head. "Fair enough. But let's talk about something a little more interesting than just history, shall we?" The audience chuckled lightly. Palmer kept his grin, but Musk could sense the shift already. The opening was harmless, but the real game was just beginning. Palmer twirled a pen between his fingers, pretending to glance at his notes. "Elon, you've built rockets, electric cars, even implanted chips in monkey brains." His smirk widened. "Some would say you're playing God." Musk gave a small chuckle. "If I were playing God, I'd at least make sure my rockets didn't explode." The audience laughed, but Palmer wasn't letting go. "Right, but let's be real," he pressed, his tone sharpening. "You've got more money than entire countries, and people worship you like some kind of prophet. Do you ever wake up and think, maybe I should slow down before I turn into the next Bond villain?" More laughter rippled through the audience, but Musk, unfazed, tilted his head slightly. "If I were a Bond villain, I'd at least have a secret lair by now. Unfortunately, I still live in a $50,000 house in Texas." The crowd laughed again, but Palmer wasn't laughing. His eyes flicked to his cue cards, ready for the next move. Speaking of that house, he continued, tapping a card, didn't you just fire most of the janitorial staff at X? The energy in the room shifted. The friendly banter had officially ended. Musk's expression remained unchanged. We had to make some adjustments. Palmer pounced. Adjustments, he repeated, leaning in. That's an interesting way to say, left people jobless right before the holidays. A few murmurs rippled through the audience. Musk exhaled quietly. Running a company isn't about keeping everyone happy, he said evenly. It's about keeping it alive. X was losing $4 million a day. Palmer shrugged theatrically. Must be tough, being a billionaire and making all those sacrifices. A few audience members chuckled, but others sat in silence, watching. Musk's expression didn't shift. He knew exactly what was happening. Palmer gestured toward the audience. You hear that, folks? Tough, being the guy who owns private jets and sends cars to space. Musk leaned forward slightly. Do you want to have a real conversation, Bryant? Or are you just here to perform? The room tensed. The audience went silent. Even Palmer blinked, just for a second. But the game wasn't over yet. Palmer adjusted his cue cards, his smirk sharpening. The playful banter was over. Now it was time for the real show. Elon, he said, his tone shifting to something more pointed. You've built rockets, electric cars, and now you're putting chips in monkey brains. Some would say you're playing God. Musk chuckled lightly. If I were playing God, I'd at least make sure my rockets didn't explode. The audience laughed, but Palmer wasn't done. He leaned forward, voice lowering just slightly, giving the illusion of intimacy while setting up his next move. Right, he said, but let's be real. You've got more money than entire countries. People treat you like a prophet. Do you ever stop and think, maybe I should slow down before I turn into the next Bond villain? Musk's face remained calm, unreadable. If I were a Bond villain, I'd at least have a secret lair by now. Unfortunately, I still live in a $50,000 house in Texas. Some laughter from the audience, but Palmer wasn't laughing. He flipped through his cue cards and tapped one, his next attack ready. Speaking of that house, Palmer continued, let's talk about your company's workplace issues. You recently fired most of the janitorial staff at X, just before the holidays. A low murmur rippled through the crowd. Musk's expression didn't change. We had to make some adjustments. Adjustments? Palmer repeated, his grin sharpening. That's an interesting way to say, left people jobless. Musk exhaled quietly. Running a company isn't about keeping everyone happy. It's about keeping it alive. X was losing $4 million a day. Palmer shrugged theatrically. Must be tough, being a billionaire and making all those sacrifices. A few in the audience chuckled, but others sat in silence, watching the exchange. Palmer pressed on. Let's talk about Tesla, lawsuits, recalls, workplace discrimination claims. He gestured toward the audience. How do you respond to people who say your company has a serious culture problem? Musk's expression remained even. You're talking about issues that affect every major company in America, and when we find problems, we take action. Palmer scoffed. So, just business as usual? I'm saying it's not unique to Tesla, Musk said, voice steady, and it's not something we ignore. Palmer saw his opening. Okay, but Neuralink, brain chips, what happens when hackers get in? Or when the government decides to, I don't know, turn people into robots? The audience chuckled nervously. Musk gave a small smile. You watch too many movies, Bryant. Palmer smirked, shaking his head. Come on, Elon. You can't tell me you don't see the risks. Musk tilted his head slightly. You think I'm trying to control people? Palmer spread his hands. You influence social media, transportation, space travel, AI, and now the human brain. Yeah, it raises some questions. Musk let the moment hang, then replied calmly. I think skepticism is healthy, but the idea that I'm sitting in some lair, rubbing my hands together, is a little ridiculous. Palmer smirked, sensing his grip loosening. Well, you did name one of your AI projects Ex Machina. Pretty ominous, don't you think? Musk smiled faintly. It's actually XAI, but close. The audience chuckled, but the tension remained. Palmer wasn't finished. He flipped to another card, his voice turning serious. Okay, but let's talk about something you can't dismiss so easily. Tesla has faced multiple lawsuits for racial discrimination. Employees have reported hostile work environments. You want to take humanity to Mars, but how do you let this happen right here on Earth? Musk's face didn't shift, but something in his eyes did. You're talking about an issue that affects every major company, he said carefully, and we take these matters seriously. Palmer scoffed. Right, so what? You're saying it's just business as usual? Musk exhaled. I'm saying it's not unique to Tesla, and it's not something we ignore. Palmer leaned forward, pressing harder. You call yourself a problem solver, so why haven't you solved this problem? Musk stayed calm. We work to improve every day. That's all any company can do. Palmer scoffed again, but this time the smirk was thinner. Musk wasn't breaking. He wasn't flustered, defensive, or rattled. Bryant Palmer flipped through his cue cards, his smirk tightening. The playful banter had run its course. Now it was time for the real questions, the ones designed to make Musk uncomfortable. Elon, Palmer began, his tone sharpening, Tesla has been hit with multiple lawsuits, racial discrimination, unsafe work environments, even claims of suppressing workers' rights. People say your company has a serious culture problem. What do you say to that? The audience shifted in their seats, sensing the shift in energy. Musk's expression remained steady. You're talking about issues that exist in nearly every major corporation, and when we find problems, we take action. Palmer scoffed. So what, just business as usual? Musk tilted his head slightly. I'm saying it's not unique to Tesla, and it's not something we ignore. Palmer leaned in. But if you're this hands-on genius, this visionary, shouldn't you be solving these problems instead of just reacting to them? Musk exhaled slowly. We work to improve every day. That's all any company can do. Palmer studied him for a moment, then switched gears. All right, let's talk about something else. Neuralink, brain chips, AI. What happens when hackers get in, or when the government decides to, control people's thoughts? The audience chuckled nervously. Musk gave a small smile. You watch too many movies, Bryant. Palmer smirked, shaking his head. Come on, Elon. You can't tell me you don't see the risks. You're putting chips in people's brains. At what point does this become too much power in one man's hands? Musk leaned back slightly, his face calm. You think I'm trying to control people? Palmer spread his hands dramatically. You influence social media, transportation, space travel, artificial intelligence, and now the human brain. That raises some questions, don't you think? Musk let the moment hang. Then he answered in the same measured tone. I think skepticism is healthy, but the idea that I'm sitting in a secret lair, rubbing my hands together, is a little ridiculous. A ripple of laughter moved through the audience. But Palmer wasn't done. Well, you did name one of your AI projects Ex Machina. Pretty ominous, don't you think? Musk smiled faintly. It's actually XAI, but close. Palmer's smirk tightened, sensing Musk wasn't rattled. He flipped to another cue card. All right, let's talk about something you can't dismiss so easily. Tesla's treatment of employees. Reports say people have faced discrimination, unsafe conditions, even harassment, and yet you continue to expand. How do you let this happen? Musk's face remained impassive. Every company faces challenges. The question is how they address them, and we take action when necessary. Palmer scoffed. Right, so you're saying it's just part of doing business? Musk's voice remained even. I'm saying it's not something we ignore. Palmer leaned forward. You call yourself a problem solver, so why haven't you solved this problem? Musk stayed calm, unshaken. We work to improve every day. The audience watched closely. Musk wasn't dodging, but he wasn't letting Palmer control the conversation either. He was refusing to be baited. Palmer drummed his fingers on the desk. He had seen guests crack under pressure, fumble their words, get defensive. But Musk? He was too steady, too practiced. For the first time that night, Palmer realized he might be losing control of the interview. Bryant Palmer tapped his cue cards on the desk, his smirk widening. He was enjoying himself now. Come on, Elon, he said, his voice smooth but pressing. You can't tell me you don't see the risks. You're putting chips in people's brains, controlling internet satellites, automating every car on the road. At what point do we start calling it what it is? Power? The audience murmured. Some nodded, others exchanged uncertain glances. Musk tilted his head slightly, his expression unreadable. You think I'm trying to control people? Palmer spread his hands. I think when one man has influence over social media, transportation, space travel, artificial intelligence, and now the human brain, yeah, it raises some questions. The audience buzzed. Palmer sensed he had the upper hand and leaned forward, delivering the next blow. But let's be real, Elon, he continued. You love playing the underdog, the misunderstood genius, the rogue billionaire fighting against the system. But isn't that just branding? A man worth nearly $200 billion isn't against the system. You are the system. Musk remained calm. Then slowly he leaned forward, just slightly. Would you like to talk about your system, Bryant? Palmer blinked. Excuse me. Musk's voice was steady, unshaken. You sit here and call out corporate greed, but your show runs ads from pharmaceutical companies, billion-dollar banks, and defense contractors. You work for a network that's been sued for pushing false information.